All right, we're back on track. So we're going to look at the audit. 5A. Review, discuss, approve, reject recommendations contained in the division of the internal audit report. Page 1. Awesome!
Give some background.
Well, okay, so in January of this year, we were advised that the previous administration was going to do an audit through the governor's internal audit division, the Governor's Office of Finance Division of Internal Audits. That began in January. In June, their report became finalized and was sent to us. We were given explicit instructions that we could not discuss this, including with the board members. And so we did not. And
Other than
the board president. And that was our explicit instruction. So that's what we did, and apparently they weren't happy with that. So, but a response was filed that you've all had the opportunity to review, I hope. The audit itself, so I want to divide it kind of in two parts. There are the recommendations that were made from the audit, and then there were some background discussion leading to those recommendations. The recommendations themselves, and obviously this is for the board to determine, I don't find the recommendations themselves to be problematic. I mean, I don't see an issue with accepting the recommendations themselves. The issues with this audit is I feel that there are some misunderstandings as to what was going on, and I feel that, and in discussion with our Deputy Attorney General, that there may be some misunderstandings not only with our process, but with the laws that were cited in this audit. That having been said, we did file a response in an attempt to clarify some of those misunderstandings, but if you look at the first paragraph of the response, it is not technically our official response because the board had not been given the opportunity to review this and to determine whether they, as a group, agreed with the response or not. So at the meeting that was held June 25th, I will tell you that the governor was none too happy with us based on this audit, and has he's rescheduled this audit for the November 9th, I believe? The November
7th. November 7th.
For the November 7th meeting, he has requested that as many of the board members as possible be there. And the suggestion was also made that the board may want to submit a revised or amended response. If you do, we'll work on that. You're certainly not required to, and you're certainly not prohibited from. So,
what was the meeting? Gonna be at?
November 7th?
November 7th. It's down at the Grant Sawyer Building.
Oh, here.
Yeah, in Cashman, by Cashman Field.
Right. So that's just a background overview.
Sorry, real quick, if
Yes.
you plan on attending the meeting, I think it is also video conference up north, but please let Deb know to see if we have quorum issues and things like that too.
Quorum issues because we would not.
Is that because you can't have a quorum?
Well, I guess technically you shouldn't because you're talking about your board
We're not
business.
voting on
Well, your opinions are going to be solicited, so just let Deb know if you plan on, and then we'll work it out.
If there's gonna be an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, but isn't that a conflict of interest if they're saying, if we get hit on the hand and saying, oh, you didn't have any board members there and we want all the board members to be there when we talk about it, but then it's violating the quorum, so how can you do, oh, we want all the board members to be there, and then you say, oh, well, you can't have all the board members be there?
So just let Deb know if you plan on attending, and then we'll figure it, we'll get it taken care of.
November 7th?
Yes,
Right.
Is there a time? Or?
10 a.m.
10 to 6.
Seriously?
No.
10 to 6.
I think, isn't it 1 o'clock?
No.
10 o'clock.
Oh, I don't. So, either Deb or Melanie will confirm and then let you guys know.
So what led to this audit was a slew of public comments in front of our board, in front of the Board of Examiners, making a lot of very serious allegations that we didn't respond to out of respect for the confidentiality of both the licensees and the patients. No one.
NDA versus.
Right, and a lot of it was that this board is somehow favoring members of the NDA versus people who are not members of the NDA, and that was a lot of the public comment. So the Governor Sandoval asked to have, or approved this audit, and it was, they came, they talked to us, they requested a bunch of information, and I think that just as important as what is in the audit is what's not in the audit. And what's not in the audit is any validation for much of those public comments. And in fact, in the audit, it explicitly says that there was no findings of bias based on any of the allegations that were being made. So that part was, they did address that allegation. I think, let me just go through the recommendations and then you can ask questions and make comments. So the first recommendation is to strengthen the oversight of the investigative and enforcement activities. The bulk of this came from the fact that, I don't know how long this has been going on, probably 20 or 30 years, because our statute requires that we investigate all verified complaints. A procedure was put into place, probably, I mean, long before any of us were affiliated with the board, that a pre-verification review of a complaint was made to make sure that it was something that the board could even do something about if the investigation proceeded and the allegations being made by the patient were such that we found them to be true. Is this something we can do anything about? And the auditors had a big problem with that. They didn't feel that there was any bias attached to it, and they put that in there explicitly, but they did feel that there were some inconsistencies in some of the complaints that went forward, and their concern was, and their concern stated in the audit was, not that we think that some dentists are being favored, but that some patient complaints that maybe should have been investigated weren't. That was their concern. They didn't review the actual complaints. They reviewed a spreadsheet giving a one-line discussion of what was in the complaints and the reasons for them being not verified. It's the opinion of the auditors that that our statutes and regs read together, require us to allow anyone who wants to verify a complaint to verify a complaint. Because that is the opinion, and if you read the statute that way and the regs that way, then from this point forward, we, as a group, unless you want to state otherwise, we will have all of the complaints verified. The verification form is on our website as of now. Anyone who wants to verify it can, and every complaint will be investigated. This is going to increase our costs. It's going to, but this is what, and so that recommendation we can accept. It is what it is. I think we've had another audit a few years ago who went through this process very much, very in-depth, did not find a problem with that. But if there is a problem, it's an easy one to correct. It's just going to cost.
I have a question
Yes.
about that, because wasn't there's 2 audits that were done, correct? The
Well,
Sunset
yes,
Committee
in
had one.
2016, correct.
Yes.
It was
And
for the same process. It was
same-
the investigative
same sort of
process.
thing, right? And I'm sorry, so are you telling me that in that investigation, the Sunset, the 2016, that this DSO and strengthening, this section 1 that you're talking about, that wasn't in that?
They used some of the same language to strengthen oversight, but in that respect, they were talking about strengthening oversight of the DSOs themselves, and that's where the review panel came from. And so the recommendations were accepted and implemented. The review panel was made possible by a legislative amendment, and the review panel was immediately implemented. So that's what that audit was talking about when they used that language. The issue of the pre-verification jurisdictional review, I didn't see it in there. I don't believe it was in there. I wasn't here at the
Wasn't even an
time,
issue.
but it was not brought up.
No.
I just remember one of the council people that were sitting there, because I just watched the video at 09. She was pretty angry about the whole investigative process, even to the point of, like, maybe we need to go back and look at some things. And so that's why I was asking about, that was her comment, not mine. But that's why I was asking about that.
Go back and look at what things.
Her comment was, if the investigation, sorry, I'm paraphrasing it, but as I understood it, she was questioning how the investigative process was done, and that she was concerned about people that had gone through it, and if the process hadn't been done correctly, that maybe we should look at we may have to go back and readdress some of those, because
When you say you watched a video, which video?
Which
I'm sorry,
video?
which
I don't
audit are
remember
you
that.
talking about?
Yeah.
that was last year, I'm sorry.
Oh, last year?
Well, I
Before-
watched a video it was from 2016.
So that's the old audit. Okay, that has nothing to do with this audit.
I know, but what you just talked about
Mhm.
here,
Mhm.
in this, strengthening oversight, investigative, and enforcement activities, to my untrained ear, it sounds very similar.
And that's what I'm telling you. It is the same type of language.
Okay.
But it was referring to different things. It was referring to different parts of the
Right.
process.
Okay.
And when whatever occurred during the last audit, we have been reviewed on 2 separate occasions and have been found to be fully compliant with all of the audit recommendations from that first audit. So
they made a recommendation of 14 on the first one, and then they did this audit, and came back with another.
another 4, but it's a different, that was a legislative audit. This is an executive branch audit. So it's different auditors, but they were reviewing the same process.
Thank you.
And did I hear you, Melody? So the review panel came out of the 2016 audit, okay? And now this group doesn't feel that that was enough, or this audit is...
They're talking about something different.
Oh.
So you know, and you have the full audit, and I fully encourage everyone to read it, and you have the response that we submitted, and I fully encourage everyone to read it, and if you have any issues or problems or corrections or questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Sophia is also very well aware of all of these issues. She can answer them for you, answer any questions you might have as well. This particular audit did not have anything negative to say about the review panel. It wasn't talking about the DSOs in terms of their review of these cases. There were some other issues that they had with some of the DSOs, but the oversight of investigative and enforcement activities was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think almost exclusively having to do with our
Wasn't there something about the review panel? There were people who were in the beginning, they sat on the review panel later and stuff.
that was in the next section, okay, but it wasn't, the issue that was addressed in the audit was not that the review panel was making biased decisions, or that the review panel wasn't functioning properly, or that the review panel was violating statute. None of that was found. They had a problem with one vote that had to do with compensation for the review panel, and we'll get to that.
So I think if we get to the conclusions on page 9.
Right, so they're saying that the board oversight is lacking for the DSO coordinator decisions that may restrict the rights of complainants and licensees, and I don't.
That's with regards to the verification.
Okay, so anything that did go through, they're not talking about that. Anything that was investigated, they're not talking about. They're talking about the fact that some cases were not investigated. The duties may conflict with other duties, and what they're referring to there is that our DSO coordinator also sat on our review panel. And they were concerned that his initial review was some sort of investigation, and it wasn't. The jurisdictional review was merely...
Is it something that the board would cover or not?
Correct. And then he did not investigate. The investigator investigated, and then it went to the review panel, and he sat on the review panel.
And I think it's important also to know, so when he would review a complaint for jurisdictional purposes, we would then notify the patient, you know, that they could, that, you know, here's the verification forms, you know, this does fall under our, and some patients don't file those back. They may have resolved it with the dentist on their own or whatever. So just because a complaint was sent to be verified didn't mean it got verified. That would be at the discretion of the patient. And a lot of times the patients already have worked it out with the dentist or the hygienist.
Right. And so...
and then talks about the DSOs
the DSOs being assigned the majority of complaint investigations. Okay, so that is another issue that we have absolutely no control over. And that is because the way that the cases are assigned is that if a general dentist is the subject of a complaint, with very few exceptions, but a general dentist will review that complaint. If an orthodontist is the subject of the complaint, an orthodontist will review the complaint. We calculated all of our complaints over the past 3 years, and 75% of the complaints were submitted concerning dentists, general dentists in Southern Nevada, where the patient was in Southern Nevada. And we do our best to assign DSOs who are in the same location as the patient in the event that the patient needs to be evaluated, so that we don't have people flying all over the state to evaluate a single patient. So 75% of the complaints that we received during this 3-year period were general dentists in Southern Nevada, which means that they were assigned to general dentist DSOs in Southern Nevada. We only have 5, and I think as of today we only have 4. So those 4 or 5 are going to be assigned the majority of the cases, simply because of the types of cases that we're getting in. It's not Deb picking or favoring or anything like that. It's 75% of our cases have to go to one of these 4 or 5 people. And that's where that comes from. And so we were told, well, you need more DSOs. Well, we have a standing recruitment on our website, and there's criteria to be a DSO, and we just don't get very many applications. We just don't. And that's, nobody, you know, there aren't very many people who want to serve in this capacity. So that's where that conclusion came from. And the only thing we can do about that is revamp our DSO process and our investigative process. And that is something that we can discuss when we're, as we've said different times during this meeting, we are going to be meeting with our Legislative and Dental Practice Act subcommittee, where we will go through the audit, where we will go through all of our existing regulations and come up with new or amended regs to submit to the full board for consideration. And we'll go through the workshop process and the LCD process and all of that. So that is coming, but so while we're happy to, in my opinion, this is up to you, but while I believe that the board would happily accept the recommendation, I think that some of the bases of that recommendation were misunderstandings, miscommunications, misstatements, and whatnot. So that's number one. Any questions on that one?
So it was 75% of verified complaints is what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Of the investigations are.
And so is the DSO coordinator still like responding to the initial?
No, they're being verified.
Everything is being
Everything is
verified. Mhm. Everything is being verified.
And I can tell you, in the 2.5 weeks we've been doing it,
The number of complaints has
Are-
risen exponentially.
out of control, but we'll do it.
And that's not gonna change any of the numbers because you're still working with the same
Exactly.
numbers of DSOs in each specialty. So I guess it would seem rather simple to me that that should have been something that they evaluated as far as how many dentists or DSOs do you have for each specialty, and then you have to look at the number of, like what is an audit for if it's not to look at something like
We
that?
gave them that information. They had that information. And I think the feeling was we were somehow limiting the number of DSOs that we had, and so therefore we should have more DSOs to alleviate that problem. We would have loved
We
to
have
more
plenty of
DSOs.
specialty
Right,
DSOs.
Right.
We
So-
just, we don't have as many general,
Just in Clark County, the 7.
Right.
even in Northern. We
I
only,
thought there was a lot in Northern, but most.
there's only 2 general.
There's 2 generals in Northern, but that's
That
enough.
list we approved last time was good.
Well, and that I think is part of the confusion. We approved a list of 26 DSOs, but it's not, all 26 can't review any complaint that comes in. It's not a situation where we getting a complaint in and we're giving it to the same DSO because we like him or her better. That's not the case. It's when we approve that panel, we're approving prosthodontists, orthodontists.
That mix was everybody.
It was
Yes.
everybody. It was Northern, it was Southern, it was General, it was
Perio.
perio,
Right.
pediodontists, it was,
Of the ones they looked at during this audit, there were only 7 general. And I think there was, what, 24?
24 or 26.
On that list.
Yeah.
And then, but 75% of the complaints filed against general dentists here. Then there's also complaints filed against general dentists in Northern Nevada.
So,
If you have a specialty dentist who are approved as DSOs and they don't get enough cases, do you lose them after a while?
No,
Does the
because
pool-
they're paid per case. They're
Okay.
paid per hour that they work. So if we don't, there are some that have not, they're on our panel, but they haven't gotten a case in years.
Perio gets the least.
Perio doesn't get very many. You know,
Perio and endo
yeah.
get the least amount.
So, you know, and then, you know, we've had some, you know, we have probably more oral surgeons than we need for the number of oral surgery cases that we get in. You know, so yeah, some don't get any and they don't get any money when they don't do it, but they can remain on the panel. So that,
Yeah.
And the oral surgeons we also use for general anesthesia.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
too.
so, so like I said, I think there was a lot of misunderstanding. And I think that some of the language that was used in here was a little bit inflammatory where it didn't have to be. But that doesn't change the fact that there shouldn't be any board can always do better. Any organization can always do better. And, you know, there's no issue with having someone say, hey, why don't you look at this, that, or the other? And I think that that's where the recommendation comes in, see what you can do to strengthen oversight. So we're doing what they, according to their assessment, every complaint should be verified. There should not be that pre-verification jurisdictional review, and so we won't do it. But according to that, we are required to investigate all verified complaints. So unfortunately, licensees are going to see more complaints coming through their doors and more need to hire counsel if that's what they choose to do, respond to the complaints, and we now have no control over that. So,
And it's unfortunate because
Well,
the dentists who receive these complaints, you know, now they have to respond to them, and who knows if they're gonna contact their malpractice carrier, who's then gonna assign an attorney, and then their malpractice, I mean, it has a ripple effect.
for clarification, we've been required as a board to dissolve our current chain of how we do the complaints as we come in?
according to this
Or
audit.
was it a request to do better?
Well, it's a recommendation, but the recommendation that was made was based on a reading of our statute that we don't have the authority to have that pre-jurisdictional review. So if that's what they feel,
That
then.
the board doesn't have it, or that one person that we've assigned that's not a board member?
Well, because
has
if
that
You can't review a complaint.
you can't review a complaint, that's the problem. Because
So when it was originally written, was it written concurrently with having this position filled?
I can't answer that, it was 30 years ago,
Prior
so
to,
I don't know.
Prior to the DSO coordinator, which was, I would say probably around 2004, if you remember Dr. Bush. Okay, so when prior to Dr. Bush, Valon Harmon was the executive director. She reviewed all the complaints as the executive director. Then when Dr. Bush came on and replaced her as the executive director, having the dental background was helpful. Then, you know, the executive director, because he has all that knowledge and experience.
Sure.
So when Dr. Bush didn't want to be the executive director anymore, they created the DSO coordinator position to review complaints based on the fact that he had the dental background. So that happened in 2004, and it's been that way ever since.
Right, so we have this statute that we have that gives us an ability to handle a complaint. And so I'm confused as to why we have a confusion of who can filter
Because, okay, so.
that, because it seems like you're going, oh, okay, now we have to
Here's
do
the
away with
problem.
everything.
Well, here's the problem. The problem is that they were concerned that a single person could make the decision as to whether or not there was jurisdiction. So, if I remember correctly, their suggestion was, well, he can make the initial suggestion, but then you have to have a committee to. And if we're just going to have one committee to the next committee to the next committee, it's too many committees. So if it's not a single person, then we'll have it verified, we'll do the investigation, we'll have the DSO look at it and say, there's no
what you're
jurisdiction, that will go to the review panel, and so now we've got the committees that we already have the committee in place that they want us to have in place so that it's not a single person making the jurisdictional determination.
Because the way the statute reads, it says upon a motion by the board or upon a verified complaint, the board shall investigate. So the minute the verification comes in, the board has to investigate the
Sure.
complaint.
Well, so, let's say that a complaint comes in that says, I don't like the color of their carpet.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's not something that we would normally feel,
Right.
correct? Is your interpretation now that if that patient sends in a complaint, they don't like the color of their carpet, that now the entire board is going to hear that? Or,
No.
I'm sorry, that it's gonna be that complaint has to go through a different process now?
So it's
to
gonna
be
go
heard?
through the same process that we've always had, except it's not going to be determined, they're going to be able to verify it.
They who?
The patient can verify their complaint, it will come to us. The doctor, the dentist who owns the practice will be notified that they received this
Or
complaint.
whoever they filed against you.
Or whoever, if it's against a practice, we'll notify the owner. If it's against an individual dentist or hygienist, we'll notify the dentist or hygienist. They can file a response, they don't have to, they can get an attorney, they don't have to, whatever they need to do. It will then be reviewed, and whoever reviews it will make the determination. I don't think this has in our jurisdiction, I think it should be remanded. And like all of our cases, that will go before the review panel, and the review panel will say, yes, this should be remanded, and
Then the letter's sent.
then the letter will be sent.
So who does the review?
Well, currently, we still have our DSOs.
So I think what she's saying is everything now will just get sent to a DSO. It'll have to go through that process and through the review panel process.
So
So
she's-
whether we have jurisdiction or not, which you can tell
I mean,
right
I
off the
think
bat,
it always
everything
went
is gonna
through
go.
a DSO.
No,
So prior to Dr. Theria, who is the DSO coordinator, so a complaint would come in, he would review all the complaints. Sometimes we get a complaint like that, I don't like the color of his office, whatever, he's rude,
Yeah.
whatever, take his license. So if he reviewed that complaint and realized that the board didn't have any kind of statutory regulatory authority, the patient would be advised that this doesn't fall under our jurisdiction, and, thank you for the complaint, and it'll be held on file 10 years pursuant to the statutes. Okay. They're saying that patients should have the right to submit a verified complaint
and have it go through the process.
and have it go through the
So that
process.
the color of the carpet will have to go through the process.
We'll have, right.
So what I was saying, what's the process?
The process is, so once we receive a verified complaint, the complaint that the patient files, I do what's called a notice of complaint on top of it, telling them, you received a complaint, and this is the process. You need to file a written response within 15 days, you need to submit a copy of the patient's records, yada yada. Then they have 15 days to respond. Then they submit their response and the records. I submit all that, so the patient, the doctor, or the hygienist, everybody gets a copy of everything. Everybody's in the loop. Everything gets forwarded to everybody, and at that point, it gets assigned to an investigator, which is a DSO. Then the DSO investigates it to see, if there's any violations of the statutes and regs. Then they make preliminary findings and recommendations. Those go to the review panel, whatever those recommendations are, remand it, whatever. Then the review panel will review it. They'll either concur with the findings and recommendations, or they can have their own findings and recommendations. And then that goes back to the dentist, and then, so that's the process.
So it's being reviewed multiple times by multiple people.
Right.
So Dr. Lee, so what she's
That's
saying
not-
is that I'm
No.
saying, that what I'm saying, Dr. Lee, so what the flow chart is changing. So it's not gonna be reviewed by a DSO coordinator anymore. That's off the plate. So it won't be a Dr. Theriot who was the DSO, whoever it is, it could be Dr. X. There is no longer a DSO coordinator reviewing the verified complaints. That's what they're saying.
So the DSO, doesn't have the ability to dismiss it at that. He has to say, no matter what, has to send it to the review committee.
That is the recommendation of the auditors.
And that's what we're doing. I mean, that's another thing that they, so
it's a random DSO that they're gonna pick, but they don't have very many to pick from, that's what they were saying earlier.
Sophia, where is that recommendation? What page is that on?
which recommendation?
The one that she just
About
said.
sending everything,
So that was, let's see. So they say that some complaint data. So they say this inconsistency indicates that at least some complaints dismissed by the DSO coordinator should have been investigated. And again, I do take issue with the word dismissed.
Where are you reading?
I'm reading on page 5,
Okay.
at the very top. We did not find, however, any apparent bias or preferential treatment in decisions, only that there were inconsistencies in the decisions. So, from that, you know,
And those were based on the spreadsheet.
Weren't they referring to, I mean, I read it as they had a problem with the DSO coordinator dismissing cases before it went up, but not the other way around.
right, so in legal speak or whatever, you can't dismiss a complaint that doesn't exist. So until it was verified, it really wasn't an actionable complaint. So the DSO coordinator would make an initial determination that the board doesn't have jurisdiction over a complaint. The patient would be advised of this and could amend they could amend the complaint, they could bring another complaint, you know, they were never told this is the end, you're done. But, you know, if we did get a complaint that we don't like the color of the dentist carpet and, you know, and his front office person is, you know, is scary or whatever, that's not what this board is here to deal with. So they would be told, sorry, you know, this isn't within the jurisdiction of the board. And you laugh, but we have gotten complaints.
Oh yeah, you'd be amazed at how many want to take
Yeah.
their license.
Yeah, when you
So-
tell those people that it's not jurisdiction,
Right.
they come back, that they want something
And
else.
sometimes they
It's
come
always-
back and say, well, it wasn't just that I didn't like the color of the carpet, it was that, you know, he pulled the wrong tooth. Well, now we
Right.
have something
Now-
to investigate.
Right.
You know, so, you know, they weren't told, you filed one chance, you're out. No, it wasn't like that. But they found inconsistencies and they felt it was not appropriate for there to be this pre-verification jurisdictional review. And
Because they considered that an investigation.
they consider it an investigation. I disagree, but, you know, my opinion is not.
That's why when they talk about
Yeah.
the DSO,
Right, and so then they say that the DSO acts as an investigator and a review panel member. So in their mind, this pre-jurisdictional review was an investigation.
even though all they had was the complaint from the
All they
patient
had was the complaint.
to base it on.
They didn't
No
No records, no nothing.
Did they provide, is this all that was received? Did they provide any spread that shows, like, what is a typical example of what they're saying got dismissed that
So-
shouldn't have been dismissed? Like,
The example that they gave to us had to do with infection control or
Right.
something.
So they had mentioned one, and they go, well, see here, this one was infection control. A patient had filed a complaint that they received an infection after having their teeth cleaned, and that it had to be because the hygienist had dirty instruments. And it's a risk and a potential complication of having your teeth cleaned when you're stirring up all that. My understanding, I'm not a dentist, but some people may end up with getting an infection on a tooth that when they've had a cleaning, especially if we don't know if it's a deep cleaning. They didn't specify what cleaning. And so the patient was equating that the dental hygienist had to have had dirty instruments. And so Dr. Theory had explained to the patient why it doesn't necessarily have to be journey instruments, and that this is a complication, and so he said, and she went back to the dentist and he gave her antibiotics and the infection's gone. So there wasn't anything to really evaluate, or, you know, it's just something that can happen. So then we had the other complaint. It said infection control. But that one is the patient was saying, I went to this office and it was filthy and nobody was wearing masks and so forth. Well, that you would investigate. So you might have 2 infection control, one doesn't. That doesn't mean that there's inconsistencies. It means that based upon the information contained in the complaint, which is what you're basing it on, the one, you know, didn't warrant investigation, whereas the other one did.
So they felt that there were those inconsistencies, but, you know, as I would submit, you know, unlike a balance sheet, or even unlike a lot of, and I shouldn't even say law, but dentistry is not black and white. And what's true of your mouth might not be true of your mouth, and what's true of one complaint might not. So each one is investigated on its merits, and I don't think it's possible, based on a spreadsheet with a one-line information as to the topic of the complaint, is sufficient to make a determination of inconsistencies. Now, that having been said, this is their feelings and this is their findings, and I'm not here to try and change the findings and the feelings. I would like to have someone listen to an explanation as to why we may or may not agree with them. But at the end of the day, the recommendation, and I even said, you know, strengthen oversight of investigative and enforcement activities. I said, that's vague. I said, what exactly do you mean? Well, look at our headings. Our headings tell you what we want you to do. That's what I was told. So we went back and we looked at the headings. So the other audit spelled everything out. We want you to have this form in your files. We want you to have I don't know. We want you not to charge for future monitoring. Do that on a case-by-case basis, or on a as incurred basis. So we were given a lot more direction on the last one. And like I said, we've been found to be completely compliant with that one. So when we went back, we saw that a lot of what the issue that they had going into that one had to do with the pre-jurisdictional review, and feeling that he had too much authority, and feeling that he was somehow in a conflict position because of his review panel position. And so the easiest way to deal with that, I mean, we can dig our heels in if that's what the board wants to do and say no, but I don't think it's, in my opinion, worth it. It's an easy enough thing to fix. It's, like I said, it's going to increase the amount of money we have to spend. It's going to increase time. We're probably going to have to hire additional staff, and that's what we'll do because we want to comply and we want to do what we need to do.
So if we implement that and we show that it's just there's an increased cost associated with that, and say we did some kind of a study where it made more sense to hire a dentist that was a board employee that had.
We're already going. We're getting ready.
Okay. We're looking into that to make recommendations to the board. Yeah, we are looking into that as
that's
avenue.
Probably the route.
Yeah.
It's going to end up being.
Which, if you're spending the money to have support staff for with the increase, then why not have a person that is, if that's what they're looking for?
Right.
And that's
right. And this process prior was to protect the public and maximize the resources of the board so that they're there to investigate, the issues. I can tell you from what I'm receiving, I don't even know how the dentist is gonna respond to the complaint, but, because you can't make heads or tails out of it, but good luck. And when he comes to me and says, I'm gonna say, go talk to the governor, because
Yep.
I don't know what to tell you. I don't. This is the process now, and, you know.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing that was in this section was the auditors felt that some of the executive director's duties were not in the best interest of the public. And with respect to that, they had reviewed stipulations of people who have been vocal about being upset with the board. And I was told specifically that they did handpick which stipulations they would review. And I can tell you that those people, I don't think since I've been here, have stipped any of them. So these are old stips. And what they determined from those stipulations was that the language of the stipulation indicated that the executive director, in their opinion, had the ability to monitor the clinical practice of the person being stipped. And we explained to them that that's not true. The STIPs give the executive director the authority to collect the information necessary for the monitoring, but that any clinical issue was monitored by a DSO, by a dentist. And their response to me was, well, the language of the STIPs that we looked at made it possible for the executive director to do that. And I said, well, there's a theoretical possibility, and then there's what we actually do. And what we actually do is not what you're stating in here.
So did they request different language?
And I explained to them that I have amended the language. I sent them some of my amended languages that some of the stipulations that contained amended language. And they said, okay, thank you for that information. We don't feel it necessitates a change of our report. Okay, that's their business, and then we have since further, listen, we're always
It's like
in
a mouse.
flux.
Yeah,
It's always in flux, and if we need to change some language, I don't mind changing language. I don't mind making things clearer if someone thinks it's unclear, and I don't think anyone in the board should have a problem with making things clearer either. I don't think there's any opposition to that. I think that the problem is that they made this statement that she's doing something that she's not.
And without knowing what STIPs they looked at,
Right.
I've only been the executive director since 2013. So prior to that, it wouldn't be me.
Right.
And because you don't know what STIPs.
But like earlier, what Dr. Moore was saying about the trying to clarify some of the wording, right? All he was trying to do is clarify, so in the future when you look back on it,
Sure.
right, you don't get that kind of information, right?
Right.
But when like something like that comes up and suggestions, right? Then it's like so much negative feedback from the rest of the board.
Well,
Like do you trust them? It's like.
Well, no, I don't think that
they're
they're-
clarify the thing, right?
right.
And that's a prime example right now. When he read it, right? I mean, just like you said, just simple language. But like 5 years later, when somebody reads it, right? They
I
might be
think
like,
it's
"What is this?"
impossible. I think it's
Of course it is,
impossible
right?
to
But nevertheless,
foresee.
it was pointed out,
Right.
right? But the negative comments from that. Right?
Well, that
I'm not saying
I'm
you do.
happy to do
Just in
whatever the
general,
board
speaking
wants
out
me to
loud.
do. So, and I have, and one of the STIP that we were looking at today with Dr. Racanelli, which I think, what did we do with that? We tabled it. I don't think we had a vote
We
on it.
tabled it.
So the STIP today with Dr. Racanelli includes some of that amended language to make it clear that the executive director is not doing any review of clinical practice of the dentist being monitored. It's been made clear. We're already implementing a lot of what is in here. Because again, there's no harm and there's no pushback against doing things better. The only thing, and I think that if you want to call it pushback that we gave in trying to explain why some of these statements are simply incorrect, it was not well received. And I don't think that that's right, because I think that the audit and the language in the audit needs to properly reflect what is actually occurring. And what is actually occurring, maybe there's some improvements that can be made to that as well. Nobody's saying we're not willing to improve, but I just think that, as we've discussed already, there were just a lot of misunderstandings, and I'll leave it as a misunderstanding, but our attempts to clear up the misunderstandings were not well received, and I think that that's a shame, and I don't think it's fair to this board.
Especially when they ask you for a response.
Right.
If you don't want that feedback,
Right.
well then why have us file a response?
Right. I mean, I was actually told that our response should have been something along the lines of to thank the auditors for their hard work, and the board will do better. That the length of the response that was submitted was not appropriate.
Make that stuff up.
So, and then I was told, well, maybe your board wants to revise their response. So I leave that in your hands, and if you want to revise the response, then by all means, I'll be happy to assist you with that. But anyway, so that's recommendation number 1. Recommendation number 2, and also, I'm paraphrasing a lot of this, and I want to recognize that I am paraphrasing. I highly encourage each and every one of you to go through and read, if you haven't already, read the full audit, read the full response. If I have incorrectly paraphrased, I apologize. I have read this multiple times, but it is your right, and I would say duty, to read through and get a firm understanding on your own, not just based on what I'm telling you. So the second one is to consult with the Commission on Ethics to avoid conflicts of interest. So in this respect, they felt that some of the votes, and mind you, none of the votes that they cited as potential violations had anything to do with discipline. None of them were on disciplinary steps. They all had to do with appointment, with the exception of one. Let me make sure I've got that right. With the exception of one, they all had to do with the appointment of our DSOs. And that some of our DSOs, in the opinion of the auditors, had relationships, and I put that in quotes, with some of our board members that should have meant that the board members should have disclosed those relationships. I am in the process of consulting with the Commission on Ethics to determine if these particular relationships are in fact something that needs to be disclosed. In the interim, I have asked all of you to help me help you by telling me your affiliations and making sure that if I have knowledge that there's going to be someone from your, that you may even even in an attenuated manner be somehow affiliated with, that I will advise you, or Sophia can advise you. So again, we're happy to consult and to make sure that we're doing everything right, but I do want to point out that the DSOs that were appointed that are found to be a potential violation of not disclosing a relationship, as you know, we appoint our DSOs as a panel, and the DSOs that were appointed were these were not first appointments, these were reappointments. And so with, I believe, one exception, and don't quote me on that, but with one exception, I believe that all of these DSOs had previously been DSOs before the board member that they noted in here should have made a disclosure was even on the board. They weren't even on the board when these DSOs became DSOs. And so
When they originally became DSOs.
When they originally became DSOs.
Correct.
So, and then they were reappointed as part of a panel You know, and there are knowledge requirements, and there are material requirements, and there are pecuniary interest requirements, and all sorts of things that go into when you need to make a disclosure and when you need to abstain. And we are looking into this to make sure that if mistakes were made, and maybe they were, maybe they weren't, I don't know, but if they were, we're going to make sure that they're not made in the future. And I can certainly assure you that nobody willfully or purposefully hid these relationships, because there would be no purpose. I mean, these are DSOs, some of whom are some of those DSOs that haven't had any cases, so they haven't made any money. So anyway, so that's
So my question is, because it's obvious that there's questions. So when they appoint the appointment of disciplinary officers, there's right now, we'll just say, just for sake of conversation, back at a way long ago meeting, 1 through 25 DSOs. Some are hygienists, some are dentists. So the dental community is a small community. I temp a lot in jobs, whatever. I'm gonna know somebody, know of somebody, blah, blah. I've worked for your brother before. So how are we going to get around so now we're a board member, we're voting on a DSO, and so we vote, but then somebody decides to take something, twist it, and now there's a relationship. So now if I decide to vote against a doctor that was previously
let's say she worked for some guy 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I may not even remember or whatever. So to me, it's like, 1, it's a small world. 2, the dental world is small. So then how do you get around voting for something that really you're just voting, oh, okay, and then it comes back at you? That is the issue that I foresee, not only for me or for anybody else here. So if I vote for, now Dr. Moore is not on the board anymore, but then his brother comes and he wants to be a DSO and he's on this sheet, and I worked for his brother 15 years ago. So now somebody's gonna say, oh, she was getting a kickback from that.
yes.
How are we gonna get around that?
I think that if there's any question, you make a disclosure.
But I'm not. Well, how about if you don't even remember?
If
But
you don't
it's a
remember,
good
you don't remember.
faith
Yeah, it's a good faith.
disclosure. So you're not intentionally hiding anything. If you worked for somebody 20, 15 years ago and somebody else brings it up, I mean, you're not disclosing, not to be intentional, but it's all based on good faith.
And I think that this is a question that, you know, as we talk more with the Ethics Commission people, which we're doing, and we're, like I said, if mistakes were made, we're gonna make sure we don't make them in the future, but no bad faith failures were made. And I feel that wholeheartedly. And I can also tell you that if that some of the things that they're saying should have been abstentions, maybe they should have been disclosures, but not necessarily abstentions. You know, and even if they should have been abstentions, the abstention would not have changed the vote. Nothing that has occurred has changed anything, even if it's found that maybe a disclosure should have been made. So
do you, in your interpretation of this, is your interpretation that if, like in her example, she's worked for somebody, maybe it was 2 days, right? She doesn't have a relationship, quotes, with that person. Certainly they're not friends. It was, you know, an acquaintance type thing. Are they differentiating between that, or are they basically saying, oh, you met them 47 years ago, you met them for 1 day, so now you have a connection and you have to abstain?
I don't think that it's if you met them. They have drawn a connection between people that I mean, I'm going to consult with the ethics people, but I don't necessarily think there's a connection, because because the connection that they've drawn is it has to do, let's say, with UNLV employment. UNLV employs thousands of people. Okay, the dental school alone employs how many? Hundreds?
Yeah, close to 200.
200 people are employed by the dental school.
And they have a
Does
lot
that
of
include-
part-time faculty.
Does that include the faculty practice and does that?
And part-time faculty that have private practices
I'm sorry?
outside of the school.
Yeah, so are we so we're talking 200 or 300 people that have some affiliation with UNLV Dental School, okay? Now, Dr. Sanders is no longer with the school. He's retired.
Oh, sorry.
Congratulations. But one of the things that they have an issue with is that someone who is employed by the dental school in whatever form, because he was also employed by the dental school, that he should have disclosed the fact that he's employed by the dental school.
But when would have that been necessary? Only if somebody else from the dental school has a question?
Only
Or-
if, so some of the DSOs are also affiliated in one way or another with the UNLV Dental School,
They're part-time faculty.
part-time
Or-
faculty.
Okay.
Or
So-
the- yeah,
so
or
are there-
some of them
So maybe the committee's looking at it as you work together. Is that, am I reading?
Well,
is-
no,
is
they're
that what
looking
I'm
as
looking at?
you're giving some, how did they word this?
Like preferential type treatment?
No, it's not even that. Personal gain for themselves or their colleagues. Well, I mean.
Working here is a personal game?
You know, so, yeah, so, show me the money, no. So
Negative.
so in my mind, and maybe I'm wrong, I could be wrong, but if you don't have any supervisory authority over a person, you have no authority to hire or fire them, you have no authority to set their compensation, and you simply are employed by the same very large entity, I'm not sure how that can be a conflict. Now, maybe it's a technical conflict according to, and that's what we're looking into seeing.
In the past, that has been the guidance from the Ethics Commission. So you
Okay.
can disclose, but you don't need
have
to abstain.
Right. So.
Unless you are in one of those
I
capacities.
mean, I did abstain a few years ago on a case where it was actually somebody who was in my department. I was their department
Right,
chair.
yes.
I hired him, I fired him, I disciplined, and I
Right.
absolutely abstained from any discussion or
Right.
vote on that person.
Right.
Well, I was looking at this exhibit 2, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, and issue A is familial.
Right, so in that particular case, the family member of one of our board members is employed by UNLV.
Well, I
Not
mean,
but was not the subject of the vote. The family member was not the subject of the vote. The family member is not a dental licensee. The family member had no supervisory capacity over any of the DSOs or over anybody in this board. Nobody on this board has any supervisory capacity or ability to hire or fire or set compensation for that family member. So
when
it
you
was
go
a
back-
very attenuated.
Right, and I understand that's what you're saying. So
Yeah.
you're gonna go back to the Commission on Ethics
Mhm.
and try to get better explanation
Yes,
of that
yes.
further definition?
Correct, we
Which
are.
is also the topic of, or one of the topics of your ethics training that should happen soon.
Right. So we are, the Commission on Ethics gives training to the boards, and we were going to have that today. But the person who was going to give it had a death in her family, so she was not able to. I'm looking to reschedule that for you guys.
I thought it was Tuesday. It was Tuesday.
Yeah, probably had a weeknight at 6 or something.
Well, that's the date I'm trying to, yeah, but it's not
Oh, it's
set
not
yet.
definite, okay.
Yeah, but I am trying to get her to do that. So we're happy to consult, and like I said, if mistakes were made, we will correct them for the future. But really, no mistakes were made that affected any of the licensees or their discipline or their investigations or anything like that. And I feel very confident in saying that. So then there was an issue, and I have spoken to our Deputy Attorney General on this, and I am also seeking guidance from the Commission on Ethics regarding this. There was an issue that they found it problematic that some former board members then became DSOs. And they felt that this was a violation of the ethical standard that states that you cannot use your public position to gain private employment or something to that effect.
I just
Yes.
saw something though to address that in the audit. In the footnote number 13, it says the board member is a public officer and a public employee.
Okay.
So if you're a public employee and then from our thing, the DSO was in a sense an employee, how can you be a public officer and a public employee?
I don't know
Because
who
it
they were
usually says
referring
public
to.
officer or public employee.
Right, but I'm not sure who they, it might have been in a different capacity, not having to do with the board, but I'm not sure who they were talking about.
What's the, but,
Can you sign your theory on up for PERS? I want to be a state employee, so just send me the forms in the mail and I'll sign up.
but where is that 13?
I don't know, I don't see, I don't see where there's, what that footnote is.
I know, but I don't see where 14, any of these footnotes are.
Right, so 13, there's a footnote, but it doesn't, I don't see it in the text. So I don't know who they were talking about or how they were making that determination. So, but nonetheless, so one of the issues that they had is board members who did not stay on in their position as board members for whatever reason, then having a position as a DSO. They felt that that was securing an advantage for themselves in a private opportunity through their board position. I've spoken to our AG at length about this, and I don't want to speak for you, but I don't believe you agree with that.
No, I don't. And as a matter of fact, a lot of other boards don't agree either, because they've done the exact same thing. So if the audit is going to state that if they think it's a problem with the dental board, it has to be a problem with the rest of some other boards too that have done exactly this. And not even just hire them as DSO. I know one board that hired a former board chair as their executive director, so. She only brought for herself.
Quietly got.
Cause y'all gonna go on and on and on and on. How about if we, we just don't abstain from everything? If we're gonna do an OB, I'm abstaining, that's that.
So anyway, so again, we're going to seek further guidance from the Ethics Commission, but currently, I don't read the law that way. Sophia doesn't read the law that way. None of the other boards read the law that way. So, you know, we're going to comply with the recommendation. We're going to consult, but I don't think ultimately it will be seen as a problem. And if it is, then obviously we'll make corrections. So, you know, that's where we are with that. Do you want to get food before we go into the next one? What do you want to do?
Can we just approve it?
Well, I mean, that is up to you. If you would like me to continue going through it, I'm happy to do so.
I would say here's another thing that's popped on the table. I hate to table more things, but if this is going to be put in front of Governor Sisolak again in November.
That's what I wondered, but
Yeah.
I have to respond though.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, we
Okay,
do have
sorry.
to, we do have to file something by October something.
Right.
File
As to
where
what the
we
plan
are
is.
in our plan to correct all of our deviant behavior. And,
So maybe we can just approve a response, which
okay.
is basically everything that we've done so far that you've stated to the board, right?
Yeah. I mean, so you guys tell me what you want me to do. Do you want me to keep going through this? Do you feel you've read it? Do you feel you've read it and you just have questions that you want to ask me about specific things without going, it's completely up to you how you want to proceed. I'm happy to keep going through it. I'm happy to just ask or answer any directed questions.
Will anything we do make any difference?
What do you mean?
Well, you've already written a response.
I've written a preliminary response that, that either the board can approve or can revise or can say, I want to do a different response. The response was an attempt to explain where we thought some of the miscommunication
It was nicely written. I don't have a problem
Apparently
with
it was very disrespectful, according to some.
Tit for tat.
Well, you know,
So
consider the
this is
source,
to
but,
Sunny.
yes.
Deb has to file a response to the governor or somebody, right?
Yeah,
Back to them.
Back to the auditors as to our implementation plan.
Can you just respond that we are revising our initial preliminary response at this time? And then we can respond the same way, or we can change it, but we don't have to do it all today?
No, you don't have to do it today. What we do have to do today is, I think, approve or reject
The
the recommendation so that we know how to proceed forward.
Approve or,
So again, their recommendations are these very ambiguous and broad recommendations. You know, comply with state contracting requirements. Do we accept that? Of course. You know, do we agree that we haven't in the past? I don't know. Do you agree or not? That's up to you to decide. So it's a twofold inquiry here. Of course we agree to comply with the statutes. Of course. But I don't necessarily know that we haven't. Maybe, you know, and if we haven't, well, we'll fix that. So that's why it's difficult to proceed with this audit, because it's, you know, comply with the Nevada Administrative Procedure Act. Of course we accept that recommendation. I would assume that you would accept the recommendation to comply with the statutes. But again, do we feel that we haven't complied with them? That's another inquiry. So,
Is there anything in the response that should be generated by this board that would make it more palatable to the governor for the meeting in November? In other words, what you said before is he just wanted to say, thank you very much, we'll do better.
is the response?
Does it make any difference in terms of the governor's eye on our meeting in November?
I
What we say?
think that when we supplement our response, I think it will be, I hope it will be appreciated that we are taking steps to ensure we are meeting with the Commission on Ethics. We did change the issue that they had with the pre-verification jurisdictional review. It's been done. It's been implemented. There's no more DSO coordinator doing pre-verification reviews. And according to them, that's what the statute requires. So it's not even like we have to go back and amend our statute or regs, because according to them, that's what our statute and reg requires. So we're doing it.
So is our response at this point in time premature to this? Should we respond a month from now and say, 2 months from now and say, here's all the things we've implemented and done?
Yes, we absolutely should do that. The question right now is whether or not you feel a different response would have been appropriate based on the first reading of this.
Is that our decision to make, or didn't they tell you that they were not happy with the response?
Well, they told us they weren't happy, but it is your decision whether or not you change it. I mean, just because they're not happy doesn't mean that it's a incorrect, you know, but that is up to you.
So the people who were auditing are oversight over the Senate board, correct? They have oversight now?
No,
I'm not, they,
no.
How does that work then?
They're auditors, they're accountants. I'm gonna be really honest. I mean, one of the things that I found most concerning, we had an audit done by auditors in the legislative audit who have to comply with the standards of accounting. These auditors have to comply with the same standards. So my question was, why in the first audit weren't these addressed? The contracting issues. The expense summary forms were reviewed by the DSOs, but it wasn't addressed. So all I'm saying is maybe they need to look at their process to make sure that, because to me, to conduct 2 audits by the state is costly. That's a waste of resources.
So what I will say is directly, no. However, these are the governor's auditors, so they report directly to the governor. And we know that everybody on this board is appointed by the governor.
The hierarchy goes that way.
Right. Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with the audit. I just think that to have an audit and then 2 years later have another audit for the same processes and then come up with
to different conclusions.
different or additional, you're like, well, if that was an issue, why didn't they address it the first time? Because maybe no system is perfect,
What's a different governor?
but the
But the
process
governor-
is the same.
The process is the same, and the governor doesn't participate in the audit.
No.
So it's different auditors. It is different auditors. It's a different agency within the government. One was a legislative audit, one was an executive audit.
Governor
but they were-
Sisolak wasn't there
But they were looking at the same process.
at the audit.
And they have to abide by the same standards.
And I know you said this, but was this audit called for by the governor?
It was, so as I stated at the beginning, there were a lot of inflammatory public comments that were made, that, you know, I've answered questions about when I've been asked. You know, I think that we've made a concerted effort not to turn the Board of Examiners meetings into a circus, and I think that, you know, that's not our role. But a lot of inflammatory statements were made, and based on that, when it came time for I believe it was the Internal Audit Division, they had their meeting in October or November of last year, right before Governor Sisolak was no longer in office, Governor Sandoval was no longer in office, and he asked, you know, I've heard these comments, and, you know, what's the status, and I forget who it was, basically said, you know, maybe we should audit them again, and the governor agreed, and so he ordered the audit.
Well, I believe he asked, have they been audited?
Right.
And they said no.
Well, they said they were audited, but there are some issues, and I
Right,
don't know
but-
what issues he was referring to, because both the Sunset Committee and this
This is the division that
Right.
came in after the legislative audit
and stated that
to
we were
make
fully
sure
compliant.
you're compliant.
Right. So I don't know what issues he was referring to, but the fact that there were quote-unquote issues, even though his division had said that we were fully compliant with the other audit, that led the governor to say, well, let's audit them again. And I wasn't there. In all fairness, I wasn't there. I'm looking at minutes from that meeting, and that's how the minutes are. That's what the minutes indicate happened.
So we're back to the question.
Yeah, so does anybody, I mean, you know, the third and fourth, again, it's to comply with state contracting requirements and to comply with the Nevada Administrative Procedure Act. Does anybody have any specific questions on either of those about anything that was said? Do you want me to go through them?
I just assumed it was, the amount paid is too much, so therefore it required a contract, is that what they're saying?
So they're saying that our DSOs should have had state contracts.
And so will we have a contract with them?
Well, yes. See, the problem is that there are different state contracting requirements and what needs to be brought before the Board of Examiners and what can be signed off on by the executive director and whatnot, and it's differing amounts. And we don't know how much any given DSO is going to earn until they've earned it.
And maximum is 2,000.
Right.
And that's without a contract.
That's without a contract. So, so we are absolutely looking into this and looking into, you know, the other issue is, if it's a contracted person, they're not eligible to be part of the state insurance fund. But we had been instructed for many years to include them in our payments to the state's self-insurance fund. And so that to us, you know, and I don't want to speak out of turn because I wasn't here, but that gave an indication to those making this decision that they were not contracted individuals. If it was a mistake, again, if it was a mistake, it was a mistake that we had no way of knowing we were making because we were advising.
Well, I mean, and whatever happens,
You know.
I just assume
Yeah, we're
In the
looking into
future,
fixing
yeah.
it, we're, you know, if
that
it's a
should be our
problem.
response.
Yeah, if it's a problem, we're going, you know, and that was our response, but I felt it important to explain that the fact that they weren't under contract wasn't because we were trying to hide anything. They're on every one of our budgets. Their payments are
They're
public
approved every
record.
year?
They're approved every year. They're transparent in our budget discussions, and anyone who wants to know can find out how much each one of them has made. It was nothing affecting transparency. It's or how much they were being paid.
Right.
They weren't being paid any more or
So
less.
what are they classified as right now?
Well, I think the way that the board reviewed it, and I'm going back when this was originally, the board so the board under 631190 appoints all its investigators, employees, consultants, investigators, you know, general
Contractors,
counsel,
right.
whoever. So
And
the board
investigators is a
appoints them.
different.
So, because the DSOs they were like an arm of the board members, because they were conducting investigations on behalf of the board and their members. So, and it's the same thing with the examiners who used to examine for the Nevada Clinical Dental Exam. Not every one of them were board members. They would appoint them. They didn't have contracts with them. They'd appoint them to be examiners at the clinical boards when they didn't have enough examiners or when there was a conflict. So they appointed them, and then they set their pay, and they were paid with 1099s. That is how it's been since the 90s, and nobody questioned this. And they've been on the general liability. So right now, currently, on the general liability insurance that we have with the state, which is a self-funded, the only people on that are board members, board staff, investigators, anesthesia evaluators, and infection control inspectors.
General liability meaning like you get hurt type insurance? Or-
So it's
Or
interesting.
was it
Very general. I'm not.
There's no actual
Policy.
policy. So we've requested a policy, and we were told there's no actual policy. This is a self-insured fund. So I don't know. I don't know if you're able to speak more to it. Normally, when you have a business, you get a general liability policy with an insurance company, and that policy covers if someone trips over the carpet and breaks their leg.
And I'm
or,
assuming it's
you
the
know,
same thing, but.
or if, I mean, but it's spelled out in the policy what they do cover, what they exclude, what not. So the state self-funds a general liability fund that if anyone covered by that fund is found liable for any injury or whatever, that the state, I assume.
So it's like a physical, not like.
I don't know.
We don't know.
That's the point. We don't
That's
know.
why-
We tried to get a copy, and there is no policy.
So like say the lawsuit, would that be a general liability?
Normally,
No.
no, but
Right.
is it?
Are you talking about, like, what kind of
The current
lawsuit?
lawsuit.
Yeah,
Oh.
we get sued.
It depends.
Yeah, possibly.
You see, I mean, maybe we should have filed a claim.
It's,
Who do we follow?
yeah.
I don't know, are you paying somebody? Who's paying for the general liability?
We pay it.
Well, then
We pay into it every
That's the
year.
address then, I guess.
And we were, and I want to make very clear that we were advised that our DSOs should be included.
Right, they contact me every year in July and ask me how many current, because you know, one might drop off, two we might add. So every July, I had to report to the Attorney General's office
And
how
all
many,
boards have to pay
Right,
into the
right.
policy.
And then you get a bill, right?
Correct,
Then
yes.
we pay
And
it.
right.
And then there's the address tonight.
Right,
Your
it's the
address.
Attorney General's office.
Then we put our, no?
I don't have the policy.
We asked for a copy of the policy, and we were told there isn't one.
Okay, well, there you go.
So, they cover everything.
Blanket, it's like an umbrella.
Right, so if anyone has the policy, we would love
It's
to
an
see
umbrella
it.
policy,
Yeah.
you know, everything's covered.
So anyway, so that's
The contract.
That's the contract issue. So, you know, we're
Dr.
gonna.
Moore, did you have some questions?
No.
All right.
Okay. And then the Administrative Procedure Act, we do follow the Administrative Procedure Act. That's when we have the workshops and we invite the public and we present potential regulations and then, I mean, we do follow that. The issue they had with this, at least in part, is that when the review panel was implemented in 2018, the way we originally read the statute was that matters that may go in front of the board need to go before the review panel. And when we originally read that, matters that are remanded or dismissed will never go in front of the board because they're remanded or dismissed. And so initially, when we first did this, the DSO determinations that remands were appropriate did not go in front of the review panel. That was initially. When there were questions about this, and I went back and I looked at our statute and I looked at the regulations that we had enacted, or that we had approved. They never became enacted, and I can't answer why. We sent them to LCB. They did not come back to us. But I went and I looked at those, and I looked at the statute, and I considered the questions that were being asked about whether or not it was fair that some could be remanded by some DSOs, and and I looked back and I said, you know what? It would be appropriate to have the remands go in front of the review panel as well, just to make sure that everything is consistent. This was a new process. It was a work in progress. We submitted our regulations. They didn't come back with a yay or a nay. And so I looked and I said, you know what, the regulations that we enacted, that we approved, don't speak to this. The statute, I think, allows us to do this, and so the change was made that now, in light of people's concerns and whatnot, now even the remands go before the panel. So the panel is reviewing everything. They felt that we should have had a workshop and enacted different regs, and that wasn't the appropriate way to change it. We had regs. The regs we enacted didn't prohibit that. A decision was made, I think that was made that was fair to everyone, because now every single case that gets remanded cannot be remanded until the panel reviews it. And so every case that is investigated, reviewed, and a determination is made by 4 dental professionals. So no one person can dismiss or remand a case at this point in what we're doing. I thought that would be a good thing because we've heard so much, oh, one person has too much power. I thought it was a good thing. Turns out it came back to bite us because, so as we continue and we go through the regs and like we've said multiple times today, we will make sure that to the extent that needs to be included in the regs, it will be.
How did it come back to bite?
Because they said that this was enacted without the process of going through right. That a change in the procedure was made.
Since this last audit, has there been anything specifically that's been already changed? Is there,
The verification.
The verification issue.
so.
So that was
can we-
number one?
Are you sending that to us in writing? Like, this is what it was and this is what we changed, or can you do that?
I can, it was on our response that, you know,
But
this
they
is what
didn't-
we would do.
They didn't like your response.
Well, I mean.
I'm not being, you know, I'm.
I mean, it was in our response that this was a change that was gonna be made, and, you know, and it's been made, and we told them in our response that the verification page is available to whoever wants to submit a verified.
Will further correspondence with them be the entire board discussion, or will it be just a small group or a committee or?
Honestly, I mean, once I send the letter to them saying, okay, here's the corrective action plan and this is what we've done, I can send you a copy.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying in the formulation of that, like,
So what-
does any of the rest of the board need to be privy to that or?
Yeah,
party
and
to
you
that,
will
or-
be, and here's why, because our next response is going to simply be a report of what we've done. So the board will be involved in what we're doing. So the board will be involved in the rulemaking, the board will be involved in decisions concerning
ethics.
staffing, the board will be involved in attending the ethics presentation, you know, so you will know, we're simply going to report to them, this is what's been done, you know, and so if we can.
So you're not gonna make a new response like the?
Well, that's
Up to you
Oh,
guys.
I see.
That's up to you guys. Whether or not you do that, we still have to report on what the board has done in
Yeah,
light
so
of
I have to put it as implemented, partially implemented, not implemented. And if it's not implemented, why? Why is it partially and then fully implemented?
So what is the status of the draft response you wrote? It has not been submitted to them? Or
No, it has.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I put in there just at the beginning that it's not, I shouldn't call it a draft, it's,
Preliminary.
Preliminary or initial or
it's
something.
pursuant to their request for a response, but then it said, this is very small.
Yeah, the print's very small.
Oh, thank you. Gosh, damn, I am getting old. Okay, so, this correspondence is provided pursuant to your request for response to the final draft audit report provided to the board on May 20th, 2019, as revised pursuant to an email correspondence from you on June 5th, 2019. Please note that pursuant to your instruction, the report is deemed confidential and is not to be shared with the members of the Nevada State Board of Dental Examiners before the report is submitted to the Executive Branch Audit Committee. This has the effect of preventing the board members from taking any action to respond to the draft audit report pursuant to the Nevada Open Meeting Law. The comments contained herein, therefore, are merely intended to provide such information and responses can be provided by the board's chair in consultation with the board's executive director and general counsel, but without consultation, input, or action by the board. Thus, this response should be considered as unofficial and non-binding upon the board until such time as the board has the opportunity to act upon it. So, you can act to approve this, you can act to say you want to do a revise, you can act to say we don't want to respond at all. I mean, although
No,
that,
this,
yes.
this is Panther. Why, you know, this seems all one-sided. You know, don't the auditors come into the board meetings and have open dialogue with this? I mean, it's like their way or the highway, and or is that just not the process?
Well, so they came, so before, and I don't know the reason for the confidentiality from the board members, but that is the instruction we were given. So, so they did come and they did speak with, for about 45 minutes they were here.
They requested,
Um,
the board president,
they-
which at the time was Dr. Blasco.
They requested Dr. Blasco to be
Dr.
here.
Theria as the DSO coordinator,
They requested him, he was here.
and me.
And Deb and myself, and they spoke with us for, I don't know, half hour, 45 minutes, something like that, maybe an hour, but I don't think they were here for an hour, but I don't recall. Then they asked for all of the information, we provided them all of their information, they had questions here and there that they asked Deb, she responded to them. Then when we got the preliminary report, they said that we were gonna have a 1-hour telephone conference, and we wrote back to them and said, wow, there's a lot of stuff in here. We really think that we should meet with you face to face and discuss this. And they said, well, okay, we'll set up a video conference and we'll give you 2 hours instead of 1 hour. And so we had that conversation with them. Some things were amended, others were not. We provided additional information after that, and this was the final product. So we did have probably somewhere between 2.5 to 3 hours of discussion with them about the audit. So, and whether or not, and then it was presented at the meeting on June 25th, sorry. And I guess that would have been a time when the board could have come and had dialogue, but again, you hadn't seen the report, so I don't know why, how it would have been appropriate for you to come in there to be ambushed about a report that you hadn't seen. So, at the next one.
And President Bethea did offer to come, but like, we didn't know.
Right, we didn't know. So it is what it is, but he has said that he's going to reconvene this matter, and that at that time, now that you've seen it, you've discussed it, you've asked all your questions, we've worked toward implementation.
Does he want DSOs there too?
I don't know. I'm sure it can't hurt, but.
Side note, earlier,
Is the auditor, who's the auditor?
she got this about the romantic part.
I'm sorry?
Could we put that on the next
Warren
agenda so we
Logan?
can vote on it?
Sure.
Because I'm assuming now it's not part of it.
Well,
Could we didn't vote? Is that what you're saying? You said?
No, it is part of it.
Oh, it is part
because
of it.
as I read the statute,
Oh,
and
yeah,
right, no, I know.
From what you said, I assumed that it got deleted, no?
Oh, no,
okay.
no, it didn't. As I read the statute and as I, the statute is the statute, and it,
Well, I was just
You know.
agreeing with it, so it sounded
Right.
like you took it off.
no, we didn't take it. But we will, we will make, because our regulation concerning the review panel never actually became never got codified because it didn't come back to us from LCB. So although there was an approval of a regulation, it's not actually law yet. So so the board has voted on regulations concerning the review panel, and that particular issue of whether remands would go before the review panel or not, it didn't say they would, it didn't say they wouldn't, and it's certainly nothing in that reg says that they can't. So,
But for oversight and transparency, I think it's great
Yeah.
that the review panel sees
yeah,
it.
I mean, at this point,
I mean, it's not a bad thing.
right, at this point, we can very clearly and without hesitation say that no one person can dismiss a complaint, no one person can impose discipline, no one person can approve a stipulation, no one person can do anything, and that I would have thought would have alleviated the concerns of the people with concerns, but unfortunately it has not. So,
Dr. Printher, did you have something to say?
No, I'm okay. This is Champagne. If there are no standing objections as to why we can't kind of move this forward to decide where we're going to wrap up today, can we call for a question or at least get this part wrapped up, whatever we need to do?
sure. So I think that on our agenda is a discussion of the audit, which I think that we have done. And then to possible action to approve or reject the recommendations. And so if someone wants to make a motion on that.
There's 4 of them.
There's 4 recommendations. They're listed on the first page of the audit.
So,
Ms. Champagne, I'd like to make a recommendation that we accept make a motion that we accept the recommendations as per the audit in front of us.
Second, Sanders.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion,
Yeah, but we have one.
motion passes.
And then